This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? Hey, welcome to Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? I'm your host, Molly Stillman, and this is a podcast where I get to sit down with a different guest each week and have raw, funny, often brutally honest conversations about the things that matter most: faith, business, life, and everything in between, where we each learn how to be good stewards of the things we've been entrusted with, even our stories, and how we can use those things to serve others and leave our families, our friendships, and our communities a little better than we found them. I want to create a space where people are unafraid to be themselves and unafraid to ask the questions the rest of us are thinking. My goal is to make you laugh, cry, and laugh till you cry. My guest this week is Mike Gibson. Mike earned a scholarship to Cal-Berkeley for football and played 2 years before he was eventually drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles in 2008. He played a total of 6 years in the NFL for the Eagles, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Arizona Cardinals. In his third year, he suffered an injury and shortly after was addicted to prescription painkillers. He started at 5 milligrams of Vicodin, and by the time he finished his career, he was taking a minimum of 300 milligrams of OxyContin daily. He eventually retired, and afterwards he became a sheriff's deputy, completing his credentials as class president, abusing OxyContin and adderall the entire duration. He was a deputy for under a year before getting asked to resign for his unhealthy habits. This setback turned him to becoming addicted to stronger substances such as heroin and methamphetamines. After going in and out of rehab 6 times, in his last session, Mike made a breakthrough and has been sober for over 5 years. He currently works as the community outreach coordinator for the Mental Health Center of San Diego. Mike's story is incredibly powerful and really, really inspirational. I learned so much about him and his battle with substance abuse and mental health, but most importantly, how he has overcome that. And his testimony is going to blow you away. I was really just encouraged to hear the story of somebody who, at one time would have seemed like he'd had it all together. He was a, player in the NFL and he was doing well and he was married. And it just really inspires me to see how he has taken what could have been a really destructive time in his life and he could have let that define him. And instead he is defining it and he is helping and impacting so many others because of it. I know you're going to love this conversation. So without further ado, on to my chat with Mike Gibson. Well, today is a very exciting day because this is I've had, let's see, 340 some guests on the show over the last 6.5 years. And, but you are probably my first former NFL player. So that's kind of an exciting day. Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. So I know we're just going to get that stuff off so you played in the NFL. I'm a Browns fan. On what level do you judge me for that?
I don't judge you. Actually, it says a lot about you and your character.
Okay.
In terms of your quality.
Thank you. Thank you. I just like to tell people that I'm a Browns fan so that I could show them that I've lived a life of pain and suffering. That's what I like to say. But that's a really, because most of the time the two reactions I get are like, "You're not from Ohio." And I'm like, "I know. So why would you choose this life?" These are the two. Right. Now, my dad is from Cleveland. So basically, I came out of the womb and my dad slapped a Kosar jersey on me. And that was basically the life I've lived ever since. So I'm just always curious. And I've always wanted to ask somebody who has played in the NFL and knows how terrible the Browns historically are from the inside to be like, do you judge me or do you think that I'm just a really loyal person?
No, a very loyal and patient person.
Very loyal and patient. Very loyal and patient. If I had a nickel for every time I've said the term, you know what? I think this is our year, and been wrong, I would be very rich. In any event, Mike, I'm so excited to have you here. And obviously there's so much more about you than the fact that you played in the NFL. And you are the work that you are doing, the advocacy work you are doing for those in recovery and with mental health is incredible. So I want you to tell us your story. So give us the Mike 101, who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so my name is Mike Gibson. I'm the community outreach coordinator for a facility here in San Diego called the Mental Health Center of San Diego. We are a crisis residential post-hospitalization and outpatient program, a long program, 7 to 9 months, and taking people like myself that are struggling with their mental health, and really get to work with them at that ground level, kind of that base level when they first are struggling at most with their mental health, and kind of ease that transition over the next 7 to 9 months and integrate it back into society, and progressing and working towards becoming a productive member of society so they don't ever have to do it again.
Yeah. So what led you to this place? I mean, did you grow up in California?
I did. Born and raised in Napa, California.
Okay. And so you started playing football at a young age. You ended up playing at Cal-Berkeley and were drafted in 2008 to the Eagles, correct?
Philadelphia Eagles.
All right.
Yep.
See, I did my homework.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of thinking just because I'm always interested in the backstories of how people get to this point where, you'd had this kind of breaking point. But, you think about being a kid. Like I have a 7-year-old son who has big dreams of playing, basketball at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. My sweet, skinny-legged, redheaded son who's probably not going to be very tall. Maybe he will be. He's very good at basketball at the age of 7. Like, he's very good for his age. But he is just like, I'm going to play basketball at Carolina and then I'm going to play in the NBA. And like, that's the thing that he's going to do. Who knows? Who knows what could happen? But the reality is the odds of that are pretty slim. But I'm always fascinated by people who, because, did you just grow up as a kid and dream of playing, football in college and football, playing in the NFL? Was that like always a life dream, or did that just kind of happen because you were good at it?
So for me, being from Napa, California, small town, at the time growing up, it's gotten a lot bigger now, but at the time growing up, you're looking at 65,000 people within the whole county. So it's not like this, it's not Los Angeles, it's not San Diego, where I currently reside. It's not like this hotbed for athleticism, right? A lot of good athletes in the area. But for me, like I had an older brother who's 2 years old. I have an older brother that's 2 years older than me. And watching him play football from, I was 6 years old. He was 8 at the time. You couldn't play till you were 8 years old. But I was always like a chunkier, heavier set kid, right? Which ended up, we can talk about that too, is like the struggle with my mental health from a very young age. But for me, my grandmother, she's born and raised in Texas, right? She was a Cowboys fan, would watch the Cowboys. And I was an infant, right? My grandma would say whenever they turned off the TV, turn off Monday Night Football, I would start crying. No,
that's how my son is with basketball. He's so sad that basketball season's over. He just sobbed after his last game.
Yeah. So for me, I'm like, well, maybe now that I look back, I'm like, maybe I was born to do this. I have no idea.
Right.
I just know for me, football was something that I wanted to do. It was used for something to escape. It's a lot of the mental health struggles that I did have at a very early age. My family was a blue collar working family who struggled with a lot of things in a very wealthy community. And sports were a way for me to kind of get out of myself. The beautiful thing about sports is nobody cares about your background. Nobody cares about, financially where you live, what type of house you live in. If you're good and you can ball, you can ball.
Yeah.
And that's what your teammates care about the most. So sports for me was a way to kind of get out of myself, get out of what was going on, the background noise, and, allowed me to just go out there and be who I was and be free.
Right. Okay. So I would love for you to unpack that a little bit about talking about some of those mental health struggles from an early age. Because I know obviously this is a thing that you've really advocated for in adulthood, but now having kind of that hindsight of, wow, this really started for me at an early age. But what was it for you that you were really wrestling with as a kid that maybe at the time you didn't nobody gave you the vocabulary to really be able to understand and articulate, oh, this is what's going on. But now looking back, you're like, oh, that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was always, like I said, I was always like the short, stocky kid, short, fat kid. You know, when I was 8 years old, my brother was 2 years older than me. Like I said, like I'd have to play against him and his friends because I was so big, you know, being around, you know, other friends that were physically different than I was. And I got made fun of a lot, you know, and not realizing what that even still, how that affects me to this day, you know, something, getting made fun of in a group to where I'm 8 years old, 9 years old, walking home, you know, 2-3 miles at 3 a.m. just so I can get away from, you know, that environment. Cause I was getting made fun of so much. Just get up and walk away, you know, different time now than compared to then, right? Like there was no cell phones back then. I couldn't text mom and dad, you know what I mean? It's like, I didn't have that disposal in my pocket. There was no Uber.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, if you wanted to go home, you got to get up and walk,
right?
You know, or get on your bike and ride your bike across town. So, and then, you know, just financially, my family was so much different than everybody else. You know, like I didn't have the cool shoes that everybody wanted. Like now I kind of have a shoe thing, right? Where I see a pair of shoes that somebody was wearing for basketball, because I played basketball too. Somebody's wearing, you know, a pair of Jordans or, you know, Nike foam posits were the big. So now when I see a pair that I couldn't afford when I was a kid, you know, I go out and buy those because it's something that I don't know if it's making up for something else that I didn't get as a child, but, you know, and how that affects today, you know, I know one thing that's common among males is uncommon among males is talking about like body dysmorphia. You know, it's kind of there's a stigma surrounding it, but men struggle with it too.
Oh, yeah.
I think, you know, all genders struggle with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just real quick, while you were talking about shoes, it made me think of when I was a kid, I really wanted, what were they? It was the Nike with the pump, and it would like pump up your shoe. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's like the air.
Yeah, the Reebok pumps.
The Reebok pumps. It's the Reebok pumps. I really wanted those. I don't know why, but I was like, I want to be able to pump my shoe up. And then it reminds me of that there was this was like a SNL sketch, like with I think it was Chris Rock. Or maybe it was Eddie Murphy. No, I think it was Chris Rock. And this is like early 90s SNL where they did a Thanksgiving Day sketch about, it was like a pump it turkey. And you could like, it was like the Nike or a Reebok like pump, but you could pump your turkey up. Anyway, quick digression. That was where my mind went for a second, was like, what was the shoe I really wanted as a kid? Oh yeah, those ones with the pumps.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I think to go back to what you were saying, and I think is a really important conversation piece to this, is you're right. Men, there isn't enough talk about the body image things that men struggle with. And there's obviously all these things and all this conversation around women and their bodies and when women are struggling with body image issues and all those kinds of things, but men absolutely struggle with that kind of stuff. And, there's always like the talk about like dad bods and, just stuff like that just, we don't realize how harmful that can actually be. But then for a man to say out loud, hey, this is a thing I'm struggling with, then comes across as, oh, well, like almost like weakness, when that's not the case at all. It's just being honest about, hey, this is where I am. This is what I'm struggling with. As somebody who, so I have a question, but I want to kind of get work up to it because I think it's an important piece of this is, knowing that, then you went into the NFL. And tell your story of kind of how you got to where you are now, where you were in the NFL, you were in there for 6 years. And, for a lot of people would think like, oh, you've reached it. You've made it. You've peaked. Like you're living the dream. Like millions of kids dream of being in the NFL. But, in your third year, something happened and that kind of began this downfall for you. Can you share that story?
Yeah, no, definitely. So for me, I mean, I truly was living the dream, right? This is something I wanted to do from the time that I was 8 years old, even younger, right? And nothing was going to stop me from achieving that, right? So like I didn't go to parties in high school. I didn't drink, do drugs. I didn't go out. And it's not because, like I have my nose up in the air or anything like that. It was just something that I really wanted to do and I really wanted to try to do. So realizing now, like looking back, right, I had a lot of insecurities and using substances to cover that up, right? When I first got to Berkeley, I was a junior college transfer. So in order to fit in and kind of open up, and because once you get to know me, I'm a very outgoing person, but with social anxieties and stuff like that, it was easy to have a few drinks and change who I was, right? And so looking back on it now, like that's what I look back and see, some of those tendencies. So essentially when I was in Seattle, I had a subluxation of my hip. The hip kind of pops out and then pops back in, and was just getting prescribed medication, prescription pain medication, didn't abuse it, took it as prescribed as I was told, and continued to take it and took it for the whole season. Right. I was always in a position to where like, I always felt like I was going to get cut. What a lot of people don't realize is, yes, we are living out our dream, but we get paid weekly,
right.
It's a good amount of money. I'm not saying that it's not, right. But there's the stress of where am I going to be next week? And there's only a small percentage of the team, one that has their money guaranteed, or they're not really tripping on where they're going to be at next week.
Right.
So there's 25 guys or more on a roster that are, every single Tuesday freak out, for lack of a better term. Right. So for me, taking that medication allowed me to stay on the field, allowed me to keep practicing, because once you stop practicing, once you stop performing on the field, the league is very cutthroat. You hear it over and over and over again.
Yep.
And so it's what have you done for me now? Or what have you done for me lately? Right. And if you haven't done anything, then they're very quick to get rid of you and replace you.
Yeah.
So for me, I was going to do anything. I did what I was told, and then ended up, there's this whole confusing area. We had a lockout at the time. So I went home to go to my personal doctor and got prescription pain medication from him. Lockout ended. I was still taking it as prescribed. Ended up, lockout ended. I went to the team, showed them my prescription, and got drug tested. Knew I was going to test positive, right? But I was cool because the team had my information. Well, the prescription that I had gotten was 31 days old, and they mandate that your prescription be 30 days or less. And so I ended up getting thrown in the drug program. And that's where I understand now. So in recovery, we talk about the phenomenon of craving, right? You can stop taking the substance, but it's all your mind can think about.
Right.
And having people around me that were using, the same substances at the same time. And I was in pain and I couldn't take it. So kind of like a double-edged sword here.
Yeah.
But I still was out there performing, still practicing, still playing, but couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I put in an appeal. My appeal ended up going through, and I got out of the drug program. And at that point, I went to one of my teammates, said, "Hey man, I'm in pain." And he gave me a little blue pill, and it was, an OxyContin 30 milligram. I took it, threw up, and I fell in love. And for me, at that point, it had turned from something that I needed to use for pain as something to cover up for my stress, kind of the mental health issues that I was going through. And then eventually led me to become chemically dependent on the substance, right? So in my last 2 years of playing, I was taking 30 of those a day. 300 milligrams of OxyContin, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I had a routine. If I went in, we're playing a game and it's halftime and I'm not really doing much, I'd go in there, grab a handful, throw them in my mouth, and go out there and chill on the sideline. Kind of fast forward, I ended up retiring, and I just got tired of kind of busting my butt and not really getting rewarded for it. I felt like I had done more and people that had done less were getting paid more. And, I was always there. I always practiced. I always was there for the games. I was always on time, never late. I've never gotten any trouble. And, so I just said, you know what, I'm going to retire. There was a little stint in there where I was a deputy sheriff in Napa County.
Yeah.
So, but I ended up leaving that job after like 11 and a half months between there and then the corrections facility as well. From that point on, I mean, I've really lost my sense of purpose. I didn't know what I was going to do at that point. The NFL is very, like, once you're out of it, like once you're out of the league, you kind of just lose touch with everybody.
Yeah.
So I was and a lot of that was probably due to me, right? Like, I don't want to hit this person up and end up bugging them. I don't want to be and I still have those feelings today, right? There's certain individuals that, are retired or they're still playing. And I'm like, I'm going to text them and see how they're doing. Oh, wait, I'm like, I don't want to bug them. I don't want to, become a nuisance, right? Or be annoying, when in reality, it's probably just me in my head, right? Making a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah.
And, so really lost my sense of purpose. I did have, my family didn't really know what was going on. Friends didn't know what was going on. They just saw this downhill spiral of, depression, anxiety, what they now is substance abuse too, right? And from that point on, like, I started using different substances, to get out of myself and, like I said, change the way that I feel.
Right.
One thing that I noticed today, 99% of people that come through either, our mental health program or a substance abuse program struggle with something, mental health. The alcohol and the drugs is just a symptom.
Right.
Right. So,
absolutely.
Right. So for me, the depression, anxiety, taking an outside substance changed the way that I felt. And I liked that person, because it didn't make me feel the way that I was feeling. So that's where, for me, continuing to abuse substances, right? Like, my lack of purpose, what am I going to do? Instead of being proactive and doing something positive with it, my lack of coping skills turned it into something negative. And for me, over the course of the next, 4 or 5 years, substance abuse, like, went from prescription pain medication to heroin, to crystal meth, to whatever I could get my hands on. For me, I was known as what they call a garbage can addict. It doesn't matter what you got. I want it, and I want all of it. 6 treatment centers later, September 25th, 2017 was when I went into treatment for the last time. And I went to an all men's faith-based program in the middle of nowhere, San Diego, generators and well water. And I spent 4 months up there.
Wow.
No cell phone, no nothing. And, at the time, all I had was good insurance that I still had left over from the NFL.
Yeah.
I couldn't get a bank account. I'd lost my home in Napa. I'd lost all my cars, my relationships with my family. I was going through a divorce. We're still together to this day, thank goodness, right?
Wow.
But at the time, it was, I had 2 trash bags, one full of shoes and one full of clothes. That was literally all that I had,
Yeah.
It's an old beat up cell phone. That's about it.
Wow. I thank you for your vulnerability and sharing all of that. And I think that you bring up a couple of really interesting points, but it was interesting to hear the way that you kind of, broke it down in some ways, because I'd always kind of heard tell of guys in the NFL or the NBA or, any kind of professional sport, even Olympians, things like that, that once they retire from that thing or they get injured and it's a career ending injury or something like that, and they're back in the quote unquote real world and they have to figure out like what to do, it becomes this identity crisis because all of a sudden they don't have this thing that they were that was what their identity was based in. And so you hear all the time about, especially like NFL guys, they get out of the NFL and then they like blow all their money and then they end up like bankrupt. And
it's me.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you hear, so it's really interesting to hear how you kind of broke that down in a way that it's like, oh yeah, I mean, I totally get it. I mean, I was, shocking, wasn't in the NFL. But, a part of my own story was at a very low mental health point in my life. I received an inheritance that I did not know I was going to receive. And guess what happened? it was all gone very quickly. And so, and I had to reach my own rock bottom. Substance abuse wasn't my personal vice, but like my financial things and were all tied into my mental health and things like that. And I like you said, I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the coping mechanisms. And so my coping mechanism was like, oh, I'm going to go spend money on this thing. And I never did buy myself the shoes with the pumps, but that's because they didn't exist anymore. But I probably would have. But I really, and I also, just for some context and perspective. So I grew up the child of two parents who were in recovery. They met in AA. And so I was surrounded by my entire, like from birth till I went to college, basically, I was surrounded by my parents and their friends who were in recovery. And so I watched people go through detox. I was like 8 years old and there were people going through detox in my living room because my parents would always, bring people in. But so from a very early age, I was like terrified of drugs, and I was like terrified.
Scared straight.
Scared straight, 100%. It's funny because I'm 37 and people to this day do not believe that I have never tried drugs in my entire life. I'm like, I've never taken a puff of a cigarette. I've never taken a puff of anything. And no one, because I feel like that's pretty rare. I'm like, no, for real, I really haven't. And I was just like terrified
to start now.
Yeah, no. At this point in my life, like I was actually joking with my husband yesterday. I was like, who? And it was just something simple. Like I was just like, who's like at this point in their life, you know what I think I'm going to do? Take up marijuana, or like, I know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to take up smoking. I think I'm just going to be like, I'm going to go to the gas station and buy a pack of Marlboros. Is that how you say Marlboros?
Yeah.
Anyway, Marlboros. I live in North Carolina, so that's probably how somebody said Marlboros. Anyway, in any event, but all that to say is I saw the very dark side of these things, and I saw my parents' friends relapse. I saw people, come to meetings, and pick up their 30-day chip like more than once, many, many times. And it was always really interesting to witness as a child and to see somebody who I had seen, relapse multiple times or whatever. But what was the thing that finally did it? And more often than not, it was that own person getting to a point where they realized I need help. Because more often than not, the previous times they had come, they'd been like, yeah, I could use some help, but it was really somebody else driving the ship. They had a court order to attend an AA meeting. A family friend got them to attend an AA, but they didn't necessarily believe in their heart and in their mind and in their soul that they needed help. And it wasn't till, and my dad would share this, but like my dad, who's 78 now, he's been sober 40, math is hard, coming up on 45 years, 46 years, something like that.
Let's go.
Yeah, he's awesome. You'd love my dad. He's pretty much the coolest guy ever. But he shares, he's always shared very openly, like for him, he didn't realize he needed help until he and my sister's my half sister, he and my sister's mom had separated. He was basically living out of his car, and this was the late 70s, and he hadn't seen my sister in a while. So he calls up my sister's mom and says, I'd like to see, my daughter. Can I come pick her up? He goes and he picks her up and takes her to an American Legion building for 10-cent beers, and she could play pinball. And my dad sat there, and this is in Northern Virginia, and sat there and played. My sister played pinball. She was 4. He drank 10-cent beers. And the next thing he knows, he wakes up the next morning in a hotel in Richmond, which is like 2.5 hours south of Northern Virginia, with my sister next to him. And he had no idea how he got there.
Scary.
And so, yeah. And so it was that was the moment that he looked at his 4-year-old daughter and he said, I could have killed myself and I could have killed her. And he hasn't had a drink since that day. And it wasn't that before that he knew he needed help, but that was the moment that it was his decision. And so I set all of that up to ask you that fifth time you were going into rehab, or that 6th time, I guess. What was it at that last treatment center, you said it was a faith-based treatment center. What was the breakthrough for you? What was the thing that finally was the, okay, this, I gotta do something here?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was actually the day, like before I actually admitted into the facility, and I was down here in San Diego, and a majority of my family's here in San Diego now. And I had kind of like broken into my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's house. I had a key, but I wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
They didn't know I had the key.
It was a gray area
situation, And, so
bit of a gray area. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, but I had the day before I'd done something, and, I had taken a check, and I tried to cash the check at a bank that I had written myself. And, my family had found out. And so I'm sitting on this corner where my sober living was, and it was around the corner from where my sister-in-law lived. And, at the time I had like 50 something days, and, which is the most amount of time that I'd ever had, up until that point for the last 2 years. And, I'm sitting there, and then my sister-in-law's husband drives by, not knowing where the sober living's at. And I'm standing on the corner with all my bags. And, I know it's him, and he just looks right at me, and I go to wave at him, and it was like I wasn't even there. And at that point, he just kept on going, turned left, right past me, didn't look at me, nothing. And at that point, it was like, I literally have nothing at this point. Family support. They were supporting me as long as I was doing well. Right. But I had literally burned every single opportunity and ruined every opportunity up until that point with the people that loved me, cared for me, and all they wanted to see was me do well. So for me, I had a resentment when I got to the treatment center. I had such a resentment towards, my higher power. And for me, like, I did everything. I had an opportunity to go to that treatment center like a year and a half before. And I'm like, faith-based treatment center, I ain't going there. What is God going to do for me?
Right.
Everything I've done to this point, I've done myself. Right. He made me short and fat as a kid. Right. He's the one that he's the reason why I was getting made fun of. Right. He basically, I was born into a lower working class family surrounded by upper class people. Right. Like, that's God's fault that, socioeconomically, I was getting made fun of as a kid, or I couldn't afford certain things, or I couldn't go do certain things, to me, that was God's fault. So for me, in the humility that I had at that point, like, I had literally tried everything. And, somebody had told me, they just said, hey man, like, you got to go get on your knees and go pray. And from that day forward, my life has gotten progressively better. And I can 100% say that without a shadow of a doubt, that since I started praying, my life got better.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, it's so interesting how we can see, even if our stories are different. I mean, obviously, like I said, substance abuse wasn't my issue, but I had also had that during that low point of my life, that's those same thoughts of like, this was God's fault. God's the one that took my mom from me. And like, God's the one that like put me, like, I was blaming God for all these things that were like either out of my control or of my own doing. And I had to get to that point of hearing that still small voice of God being like, no, I've been here the whole time. I'm reaching out my hand, and you just have to grab it. And, but it involves humility and realizing, oh, I do need help. I do need a savior, and I'm not it. I can't do this on my own. And it's so powerful to hear from you share your story. And again, because especially, I feel like this is a thing that historically has not been an issue, but in the last, I don't know, this is just me spitballing a number, but I feel like 30 years ish, 40 years, it's much more difficult for men to admit they need help, or they need, I mean, maybe you could even trace it back further. Cause I think about, like hearing stories of, my grandfather, or, who's long since passed away, or my husband's grandfather, both, who served in World War II, where like when they came back from World War II, like none of them talked at all about any of it. Like nothing. My dad said, because my dad was born the day before D-Day. So my dad was born June 5th, 1944. His father, my grandfather, was in France, like on D-Day.
Yeah.
And
when he was born.
When my dad was born. Yeah. My grandmother gave birth in a hospital by herself, she had no way to know if her husband was alive there wasn't a Zoom call or a FaceTime, while she's in labor. There was none of that.
Cell phone,
yeah, no, there was none of that, and so she, but my dad said, he's like, once my dad came back from serving in the war, my dad's like, he's like, I know nothing. My dad said that everything he's learned about his father's service in World War II, he learned like way after my grandfather had died. And it was because men did not talk about it. They just didn't. And so I feel like we're moving in a direction where it has become, there's a much less of a stigma in talking about these things, in talking about your faith and the strength, the importance of your foundational relationship with God and, things like mental health and substance abuse struggles. I feel like we're moving in the right direction. But it's so encouraging to hear somebody like you share your story, share it openly, and share it in the hopes that you can help others and help other men. So when you hit that place and you began to pray and you began to seek help and you began that healing journey, which is, you're never going to arrive. You're always on a healing journey. At what point did you kind of feel this call to, I want to help other men, and I want to help others who are in a similar situation?
Yeah, for me, if you would have told me the 5 previous treatment centers that I'd gone through, and then you're telling me that I'm going to work for a facility, I would have told you you're nuts. I hated those people. I hated the people that do what I do. I was angry. Like I said, a lot of resentment, a lot of pride, a lot of ego. I thought I was very terminally unique. But at that point, it was like, when I started praying, it was, what do I have to lose? I've already lost everything. I don't know. I have nowhere else to go, nowhere else to turn. And at that point, I've been doing very well. My sponsor at the program that I went through, when you worked there, you had to sponsor the clients when you were there. So my sponsor was there. I'd gone through the steps. Like I said, my life, praying and doing the steps, my life progressively got better. I didn't quite gain things back as fast as I wanted to, instant gratification. My family didn't necessarily say, hey, Mike, you got 4 months, hold our credit card. So,
yeah,
but
that's a little bit more of a process.
Like anything, right? Like, yeah, you anything, whether it's, going to the gym, whether it's, playing a video game, when you start to see progression, you see motivation, right? It's when you start to see results, you see motivation. So at that point, it was like, this stuff's actually working. I'm beyond human aid at this point. Like, I need to do whatever direction God pushes me towards.
Yeah.
And, I got offered a job as a tech making minimum wage. I'm like, well, I'm already on food stamps. So what do I got to lose? So, at that point, I ended up going and working in treatment. And I started as a tech, ended up doing that for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then, went to the business development marketing side and, just kind of always trying to progress and move forward as much as I can to help as many people as I possibly can.
I also have to ask, because you kind of alluded to it and you mentioned it, that at the time that you'd hit rock bottom, you were going through a divorce, but you are still currently married. Can you share that story?
Yes.
Because what a powerful testimony that is.
Yeah. So my wife and I've been with my wife for 15 years.
Wow.
Been married for 15, together for 21.
Wow.
So we've been together since we were 15 years old.
Oh, that's adorable.
She's in recovery as well. Yeah. She's in recovery as well. She was right alongside me doing everything. And at the time, it's her story to tell, but
yeah,
from my perspective, I was kind of the scapegoat regarding the whole situation. Not that I did anything to help, but I couldn't hide it as well as she could. I went to my 6th treatment center. She went to her first. We're going through a divorce. And she, at the time, we literally had like one more court date and then it was finalized. And I'm like, just take everything we have when we've had nothing. I'm like, you can have it all. The time we've been using together for so long, and she'd finally gone to treatment the first time I was gone the last time. And she had actually made the decision of like, hey, we've been so mentally messed up towards each other, and it wasn't always like this. So let's just put this on hold, until, the drugs clear our system. And once they clear our system, we're going to revisit it. And she went to treatment for 4 months. I went for 4 months. And talking to my sponsor and all this stuff like that, it was like, her and I had a meeting, we had a dinner, and it was like, hey, like we've been using together for so long. Let's find out if we even like each other. So let's live separately for a year. We're going to start dating again. We're going to, certain rules, like no staying the night at each other's sober livings or houses. It's like when the other person tells you to go home, you have to go home, stuff like that. You're literally starting from the basics again.
Wow.
At 10 years of marriage, which is a totally bizarre and wild idea. So at that point, it was like around 6-7 months. I was really strong in my recovery. She was sober and clean at the time. And my sponsor made the suggestion because I saw some character defects, and I'm like, hey, once you complete the steps, then you can move in with me. And so at that point, it was a little bit over a year. It was like a year and 3 months, and she had completed her 4th step at that point, and life was going good. Our relationship, we like rekindled that love that we originally had, before all this started happening. And we've been together, ever since. And
man, I feel like we could do a whole episode with you and your wife just on that, because what a powerful testimony. And do you guys have kids? And if that's too personal of a question, you can say no. Okay.
No kids. She's got a whole story. I mean, my wife's had like, I could be like way low on the number, but I know I'm shooting low. She's had like 37 surgeries.
Wow.
She was a college athlete. So her addiction is a lot longer than mine.
Yeah.
So her story, she's been an addict since she was like 6 months old, just because they've been giving her this medication up until, 5.5 years ago. She's never been on medication.
Wow.
Never not been on medication.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. So. No, but I'm telling you, that is such a powerful, and just because what you did was, one, necessary, but so hard. I mean, that is so hard. Yeah. And it just, somebody could maybe pass it off as, oh, wow, you guys lived. No, like when you really sit and you think about the fact that you'd been with this person at that time for 15 years, been married for 10, and you're going to basically hit the reset button on your relationship. You're going to live separately. You're going to date again. You're going to not spend the night at each other. Like, you're going to just this entire, like, who are we married to? Like, we have to figure that out again. And that takes so much grit and work and effort. And simultaneously, you're in recovery. I mean, like, that is just, I applaud you. I commend you. And I know that it was not without blood, sweat, and tears, and it was not without prayer. And, but what a testimony to what God can do and what God can restore, because there is somebody listening. I'm certain of it. Just law of averages said there is somebody listening who this is their story. It might not look exactly the same, but there is somebody listening who they are struggling with substance abuse. Their husband or their spouse is struggling with substance abuse, or it could be something else where they feel like they're at a breaking point in their marriage, and that they're like, that it would just be a whole lot easier if we got a divorce. It would just be easier.
Yeah.
But
it would have been.
It would have been.
It would have been, for us to just kind of say, okay, cool. Like, you go your direction, I go mine. And that's kind of the approach we took, is like, let's see if this works out for a year. If after a year we don't like what we see, then we can at least say that we tried.
Right.
Right. For me, I didn't want to, and not that it's she, obviously, but like, my life had gotten so bad that I was never going back there.
Right.
So for me, it's like my sponsor's like, what's the number one most important thing in your life? And I'm like, oh, my marriage, God. And he's like, your recovery, and what's next? Oh, God, what's next? Oh, then it's your marriage. He's like, before you make any major decisions in your life, what are the things that you should be asking yourself? Is it going to affect my recovery? And is it going to affect my marriage? Recovery is first, because if I don't have my recovery, my marriage is over with. Right.
Right.
People in the rooms, they talk about a lot. Whatever you put in front of recovery is the first thing you lose. So for me, if I didn't put my recovery before my marriage is shite anyways. Right. Like there's nothing there.
Wow.
So, but like everything for me is recovery is my number one priority.
Wow. Well, man, Mike, what a powerful, powerful testimony. And I just am 100% certain that there is going to be somebody listening who is going to hear this story and just, it's going to give them that little extra oomph to keep going.
People, when they hear that part of my story, they're always like, wow, that's crazy, and I'm like, for me, it's like realizing it was something different. It was something wild, but it was just something that we did. I just listened to the advice of my sponsor.
Yeah.
Like advice that she listened to from her sponsor, you know what I mean? Like we were so fortunate to have people, guiding us in that aspect.
Yeah.
Because it's two sickies don't make a welly.
No. I have heard
right?
that phrase.
And so it's like, yeah. So work on yourself, and whatever comes of it, comes of it. It's at that point I had surrendered, and I had seen what God had done in my life at that point. It's easy decision.
Wow.
That's easy decision.
So you, as you kind of said at the beginning of the show, you currently work and at the Mental Health Center of San Diego. What is, if somebody is obviously local to you and they're listening and they want to either support the work that you guys are doing, or what's your word of advice to somebody who is listening who maybe realizes that they need to get into recovery, or they're struggling with mental health, whether it's, because this is a wide spectrum. Trust me, I've seen it as well. And I know you've seen it as well. It's a wide spectrum. You have people who are on one very end of the spectrum and then all the way up to just, suicidal ideation. It can look a lot of different ways, but no matter where you are, whether it's with substance abuse or we're just struggling with mental health or whatever, what is your advice to maybe somebody who's local to you who wants to get involved, whether they need to get themselves help or they want to serve or volunteer, or just somebody in general who's listening and says, I don't know where to start?
Yeah, I think the important thing is just to pick up the phone, especially now there's so many resources out there and like, you're not alone in doing this.
Right.
I think the important thing is realizing, it was important for me, is realizing that I'm not alone. There's other people that are going through the same things that I'm going through. I spoke about being terminally unique earlier. It's like not one person's different than the other. There's somebody that has gone through something that you're going through right now as well. Pick up the phone. I know it's hard. I've been there myself. They got the 1,000-pound phone. You feel like you're being a burden to somebody.
Yeah.
Well, you're not. Your life is more important than that. There are resources for you out there all over the country. One simple Google search, now they have websites and you can go online and fill out an online form. There are a lot of ways to get access to the treatment, whether it's, private insurance, whether it's county funded. There's a lot of resources out there, or state funded, right? There's a lot of resources out there. Please pick up the phone.
Man, Mike, this has been so good. And I'm really, really grateful for the work that you're doing and your vulnerability. And again, just advocating for people who are either in recovery, need to be in recovery, or any stage of the process. It's just, again, having grown up around grown-ups the work you're doing is so needed. So thank you for that. Well, now is the portion of the show where at the end where I just get to ask a couple of fun questions. So, Mike, I know that you laugh a lot, but what is the last thing that made you just like really belly laugh, cheeks hurt?
I think when he told me you were a Browns fan.
All right. We can end the show right there, Mike.
Yeah.
Come on. You cut me deep.
Yeah.
I know it is funny.
So for me, I think there's a few things, right? So my nephew, I got him like a pair of Jordans, right? I got him this pair of Jordans and he didn't really know what they were, right? He's 4, and I'm like, I'm gonna get his first pair of Jordans, and he's like, oh, cool. I got shoes for my birthday. He's expecting this toy and he acts all excited. And so like throws his shoe up in the air and trips and falls backward. And he sat on himself. Like he had never done that before. It was the first time that he had, the male parts. Like it's the first time he'd ever hit it. Right. And he just stopped and he's like, oh, like he didn't know what was going on. Well, now he obviously knows what's going on. And that's a memory for me that I'll never forget. As long as I'm alive, as long as he's around, it'll always be.
Oh, I love it. I bet you are a funkle. You're the fun uncle, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get in trouble sometimes. But it's
fine. That's your job. That's your job. Okay. To be the funkle. I love it. Okay. On a little bit more serious note, what's the last thing that made you cry?
Yeah. It's kind of difficult for me in doing what I do for work. You get to meet a lot of people, but recently I had, 2 really good friends of mine that have passed away almost within literally one day, the other the next.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It was somebody who had actually gotten me into treatment. And, with them being back to back, 2 important people in my life, that's probably the last time that I cried. I mean, I deal with it on a daily basis, weekly. It's like, seems like somebody's passing away or somebody didn't get it. It's a simple program for complicated people. And, it's, I wish it didn't have to be that way, but it's unfortunate.
Man. Well, I'm so sorry. And, that is one of the really, really difficult parts of this. There's many parts of it, but, my last question is, what is the thing that helps bring you the most joy other than being a funkle, obviously?
Yeah. I think like being family, right? Like being around my family is like one of the most gratifying things because 5.5 years ago, like I didn't have that,
right.
For, being present, being there, being able to take my nieces and nephews to the movies, have a sleepover at my house. Those are things that like my Uncle Rick did for me, and I never thought that I'd be able to do like the life that I have today. Like I didn't think it was achievable. And I know that people think like that's hard to believe. People in recovery will get it. Sometimes everyday people I'm like, I was able to buy a home again. And my credit score was like 400. It was under 500, right? Like I don't get these things. Like I didn't get them overnight.
Yeah.
But like being able to have that opportunity, to not only be present for my family, provide for my family, and then the other thing is seeing people take time, that I've gotten into treatment, that I've seen put in the work in treatment, seeing them be successful because I know how hard it is. It's not an easy thing to do. Your dad has 45 years.
Yeah.
I look at like, that's something I can only dream of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's something that's achievable. When I had one day, I couldn't fathom a year.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, that was an unattainable amount of time.
Yeah. They say one day at a time for a reason.
Yeah. Right. Here in Pop says, 45 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, that's longer than I've been alive.
Yeah. And he still goes to meetings 4 or 5 times a week. So, and he sponsors guys still, to this day. So,
yeah.
Well, Mike, this has been just phenomenal. Thank you so much. You are an incredible human being. And how can people best connect with you if they want to just, connect with you and stay in touch?
Yeah, so you can go to mhcsandiego.com. There's a 1-800 number on there, so you can call that number. There's also information about our facility as well. Instagram, Mike, so at mike.gibson69. The 69 was my number. It wasn't like it was my number from football.
Yeah.
So it was my number from football. So you can reach out to me via Instagram. Facebook's a little bit more difficult, but yeah, mhcsandiego.com. Like I said, there's a phone number on there. There's a little lady that'll pop up in the corner. So if you want to go in there and type out some information, then you can do that as well. Don't be afraid to find out what resources are out there. I think, people will be amazed, what's out there and what just sticking your hand out for help will do.
Man, so good. Thank you so much, Mike. You're awesome. I hope you loved this conversation with Mike as much as I did. Please let us know on social media what you learned or if there was anything that encouraged or inspired you. You can find me at Still Being Molly or at Can I Laugh Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And would you head on over to whatever podcast app you are listening to, and would you click that subscribe or follow button and leave us a review and a rating? That really helps the show to grow and helps other people to know what you're liking and how the show could possibly impact them. Thank you, as always, for listening and being such an incredible, loyal listener. And thank you to the team at Third Wheel Media for producing this show. Now this week, I hope something makes you laugh till you cry. See you next week. Bye.